Hi, welcome back. In this lesson, you're going to learn how to use ACSS's colour and button classes. Let's do colours first. I want to put a background colour on this section, a light grey. You actually have two options. You could add a background class to the section, or you could add the background colour to the section directly. Let's try it the first way, adding a class. In the cheat sheet, if we filter to backgrounds, there's a whole heap of classes you can use here. Now, you saw all these shades and transparencies in the style guide lesson, so I'm not going to go over what these mean again. But the colour I want is this one, Shade Ultralight. And in the cheat sheet, that's here, BG Shade Ultralight. You can just click it to copy it to your clipboard. Again, notice each class starts with the main name of what it is, then two dashes, and then the value. So BG -- Shade Ultralight. Let's go back to the page. I'll pop that class on the section. And that's it. So you have a range of background colour classes for all your colours and their shades and transparencies. Let's try method 2 now, directly adding the background colour to the section. So I'm going to delete this class. If you remember, I already added a class of DF Home Hero to the section. One reason for that is so I have a class to create styles against. Now, it's always better, as you know, to style a class than it is to style the element directly. It's much more efficient, and you can reuse classes again elsewhere on the site. So with the class selected, down into the background. Right at the bottom of the colour palette, you can see how ACSS has actually installed several colour palettes to choose from. There's one for each of the colours in the palette, like primary, secondary, base, etc. And then there's a global palette as well. So global gives you just the main colours for each colour name in the palette. So this is the action colour. Sorry, my cursor's in the way of the little tooltip there. This is primary. Now these are secondary and accent, but they're missing because I turned those off in the settings, remember? Unfortunately, the blank placeholders for them are still here. They don't disappear. And then the main base colour, shade, white, black and transparent. Now I want to use shade for this background, but I don't want the main shade colour. I want a lighter shade of shade, if you see what I mean. So to access all the shades and transparencies of each colour, you have to go into the dedicated palette for it at the bottom. So we go into shade here. Here are all the shades and transparencies for my shade colour. I'll let you hover around here and experiment with these. The little tooltip tells you what they are, but I want this one, Shade Ultralight. Remember, if you don't like the auto-generated ultralight version, you can always tweak it back in the settings. So that's background colours. Just while we're on the topic of colours, if you're wondering about text colours, in the cheat sheet here, I've filtered down to colours and also only showing classes, so only colour classes. And you'll see here that all these classes are only related to the contextual colours, you know, like danger, info, success, etc. You saw those when we set up the colour palette in the settings. You'll see how to set text colours later when we style custom classes and use variables. Next, let's look at button classes. I'm going to drop a button element below the rich text element, so I'll select that. Keyboard shortcut to the Elements panel, search button, tab, hit the return key. I'll change the text. Now we need to add a class. Now you have classes that set the button colour and you have classes that set the button size. In the cheat sheet, I've filtered the category down to buttons. You can see they all start with BTN for button, then -- and then some have the colour name, some have the t-shirt size. See, there is also an outline class as well. So let's go back. I'll type BTN -- Sadly, the button classes for colours I've turned off, they're still in the list. I know that ACSS are looking at ways of removing classes for colours that you've turned off, but apparently it's complicated. Anyway, let's choose primary to start with. So yeah, that button is now our primary colour, and by default it is already at ACSS's medium size. If I wanted to override that size, I could again type BTN here to filter down to buttons, and then choose one of the button sizes. I must say here I'm happy with the default, so I'll just leave this. And this button, its size, the font size, will just automatically scale on smaller screens for us without having to set any separate responsive sizes. I would like to change the button styling though generally. I want bolder text, I want rounded corners, that kind of thing. Well, you do that in ACSS settings too. So let's just save where we are here. Flick over to the settings. Unsurprisingly, we want to be in buttons and links. Here you set your button defaults, like button text is just body copy size by default, or medium. You can override that here if you wanted to. Also button padding, I'm going to knock the left and right padding up to 2M. Make the buttons a bit wider. And minimum button width, I'm just going to leave it as it is. Button text styling is what we want. So I'm going to have button text 700 font weight. And let's go uppercase. And in border styling, I'd like to go with really rounded corners, which I'm going to do by going with 99 pixels. While we're here, we might as well set link styles as well. Now the default links in ACSS are the action color, which for me is yellow, which I think is great for buttons, but isn't going to be great for text links. So I can just change the color variable here to primary. So this will be primary color for the link, and then the automatically calculated primary hover color as well. I'll have links a bit bolder as well. And you also have a lot of control over the colors used for every part of every one of your button colors, but we'll come back to those if we need to. I'll save changes here. Back to the page and refresh. Nice. Well, because I've gone uppercase, I think I'd like the default text size now to be a bit smaller. I'd also like this text color to be white, because currently it looks like a really light shade instead. So save the page again. Back to ACSS. I'll turn custom button text size on and see how on desktop it's going to be the REM equivalent of 18 pixels. Because we've gone uppercase, which is bigger, let's drop to 16 pixels and I'll go 15 on mobile. All right, also let's see what's happening with that text color. I'll set the button to be the primary color, so I'll edit the primary button styling. And yeah, see here, text color is set to primary ultra light. I want it white. I'm going to do that for the hover text color as well. Save the change. Back to the page, refresh. And that's great now. Let's give it a hover. The hover color is a bit light for me. And to adjust that, I could go into the palette settings, edit my primary shades. You might remember L is for lightness, and so instead of 1.15, I'll go 1.05 instead. Save that. Back to the page and refresh. And yeah, that's a much more subtle effect, but I like that better. What if I wanted this to be an outline style button? That's easy, just add a button outline class. For this to work, you have to first set a button color class here. If you just set the outline class on its own, it won't work. We're going to use outline buttons later on down the page, so I'm going to remove this outline class here. What about if I wanted this button to be my action color? After all, your action color is meant to be for buttons. So I'm going to remove the button primary class and replace it with the button action class. Let's preview. So clearly we need to adjust the color of action button text. Save this again. Back to ACSS. Into buttons and links. Edit the action button styling. So the text color is set to action ultralight. I'm just going to override that in this particular case with base for both text and hover text. It just makes more sense with this particular yellow. You know the drill, save changes. Back to the page, refresh the page. That's much better. One more thing before we go. I actually want my button text to be a different font to body copy. I want them the same font as my headings, which is Barlow. And the problem is, ACSS doesn't handle anything to do with font families. But no worries, we'll just do that in theme style instead. So let's go up into theme style, down into button styles. And for default buttons, I'll just set the font to be Barlow. And that'll now apply to all buttons by default. However, Barlow is relatively a smaller font size than Inter, which is my body copy font. So I now want this font size a bit bigger again. No problem. Let's just save this one more time. Into ACSS. In the custom button text sizes. Let's bump each of these up 1 pixel. Save. back to the page, refresh once again, and that's better. So that's the basics of colour and button classes in ACSS. Next, let's move on to grid classes. See you there soon.